my company and my family made a mental leap that I was in the World Trade Center and that I was dead.
What are these moments that define our lives?
Something happens to you in a moment of introspection when you see your life flash in front of you. How do I not let this moment, how do I not let it die in vain?
How do you be true to yourself despite facing all of that social pressure?
I think what you're describing to me is a lack of moral courage. To me, good leadership and living a fulfilling life.
So I want to switch to public speaking and communication.
They were very factual, but they were dull. I said, I'm not going to do that. That's just boring.
Hello and welcome to Understanding Emotions. My name is Sankalp. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Chuck Garcia. Now, Chuck is an adjunct associate professor of professional development and leadership at Columbia University, and he's also the founder of Climb International, where he coaches executives on leadership, emotional intelligence, stoicism, and so on. Chuck is also the author of a new book called The Moment That Defines Your Life, which documents various stories of various people who have had life-changing moments, which made them truly align with their purpose, which had these massive shifts in them. And he documents these stories, including one of himself, which you will soon hear about. So Chuck is also a phenomenal public speaker. Like, you will see it when you listen to him. It's like delightful. And I was keen to ask him not only about his book, which we spend a hefty time discussing on, but also public speaking, communication, and all the related things that makes one a good leader, but also an emotionally intelligent and aware leader. Before we begin, if you find these sorts of conversations valuable, then just take a moment of your time to subscribe. It really helps me get guests like Chuck on the show, and it really helps grow the channel. Onto the show. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I know your new book has come out, and I tried my best to get my hands on it, but it looks like the international shipping or something didn't work. So I managed to read your previous book. So I guess I have this privileged opportunity of just asking you directly about the moment that defines your life. And so I guess I just want to start by asking, what is a moment that defined your life, and what are these moments that define our lives?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry that the international shipping didn't work, but by any other measure, I'm grateful that you took the time to read my first book. But my first book, for context for our listeners, is called A Climb to the Top. I am a mountaineer. It's not a book on mountaineering, but it is a book that uses mountaineering as a metaphor for how to climb careers. But in this case, the toolkit is not an ice axe or a set of crampons, but the communication skills that I worked at very diligently as my craft. For your question here, for the moment that defined your life, it started from a moment that I had in my own life. And I want all of the listeners to imagine, even though many of you live in different countries, on 9/11/2001, at approximately 9 o'clock in the morning, the United States was under attack from a terrorist attack. I, at the time, was the public spokesman for a company called Bloomberg, a very large financial services company and media provider. My job was to step on stage at events all over the world and talk about whatever the agenda was that the company asked me to speak about, usually having to do with the intersection of finance and technology. I was scheduled then to speak at an industry event with about 300 participants coming to the event on 9/11 that day at the 107th floor of the World Trade Center in New York. 2 months before that program was locked, whereby all of the speakers' times were arranged, a friend of mine was scheduled to speak at 3:20 in the afternoon. So I was scheduled to speak at 9:20 that morning. He was scheduled to speak at 3:20. Because he had a conflict, he asked me on a phone call with the conference producers if I was available to switch my time. So instead of speaking at 9:20 in the morning, I was put on the program to speak at 3:20.
Mhm.
That worked out very well for me because at the time that he asked it, I had a conflict myself and I was asked to give another speech in a different part of New York at 9 o'clock that morning. So if you
Mm.
can follow the sequence of events, at 9 o'clock that morning, I was 5 miles away from the World Trade Center. And my
Mhm.
friend Scott, who switched with me, was unfortunately in the World Trade Center.
Mm.
What I failed to do in a Bloomberg calendar that is available to everyone in my company, I stated in the calendar that I will be at the World Trade Center in New York until 6 p.m. that day. What
Mm.
I did not do was indicate where I was that morning. I had
Mm.
also told my wife the night before that I was giving a speech at the World Trade Center and that I will finish at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
When the planes hit, I was given a speech in a different part of town and was interrupted saying that an incident occurred at the World Trade Center. They stopped my speech. They turned on the television. We looked at CNN and we couldn't believe what we were watching. The
Mm.
planes hit the buildings ultimately collapsed. The problem
Yeah.
for me, and this is where the moment comes in, is everyone in my life, my company and my family made a mental leap that I was in the World Trade Center and that I was dead
Mm.
because three of my colleagues were in the building, were able to get a text out to the company before the buildings collapsed. I, however, had no means of communicating with them because the cell phones and the landlines were dead. So a
Mm.
few hours later, I walked back to the office and there was a list, and the list said, unaccounted for and presumed dead. You
Mm.
can imagine that when I saw myself on that list, I realized I had not communicated that I was in a different location. So everybody thought that I had died that day.
Mm.
Something happens to you in a moment of introspection when you see your life flash in front of you. And what I realized over the last couple of weeks, there were the 2 weeks after that, there was nothing I could do to change that event. There was
Mm.
nothing I could do to bring my friends back from the brink of death. But there's one thing that I can do, and that's to change myself. And I thought about that. How do I not let it die in vain? I needed to memorialize it, to honor it. And I wasn't exactly sure what to do with it. But what I found,
Mm.
it was a moment that ultimately led me to change careers. It led me to completely change the way I think about what is success. And it ultimately, after 25 years on Wall Street, it led me to leave that Wall Street world not
Mm.
so much behind, but then I use that as a measure of completely switching careers. So to our listeners, I am a career Wall Streeter. But nine
Mm.
years ago, when I decided that that moment had an impact on me, I went home one day after a mountain climb in Alaska. I formed my own company. I'm what's called an executive coach. I'm also
Mm.
on faculty at Columbia University, where I teach graduate students. And so for me, my moment led me to moments of trying to understand and make sense of a tragedy and
Mm.
what benefit could I do that came out of that tragedy that could help other people.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a very powerful story. Just listening to it. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
take me through that moment when you realized um, that your family doesn't know about it. I like that. That was especially strong for me to realize that you know that others know that you might be dead. And when you talked with your family, how do they see that moment? How did they see it then, and how do they see it now?
Yeah, well, they were in complete shock. My wife, it was interesting how normally I don't tell her my movements necessarily. As back then, I led a very active career. I was always in another country, another location. I gave speeches all over the
Mm.
world. And it was funny in retrospect how I mentioned to her the night before, I was very specific. And normally I'm not. Normally I'll be in Midtown in New York, I'll be in Boston, I'll be in Washington, but I was specific. I will be at the World Trade Center. And she remembered that. She said, okay. So when
mm,
the planes hit, she did not know that I was in another location. She was only dealing with the information that she had available to her. So
mm,
what she had to say then was, okay, he must be there. She was completely freaked out. She called Bloomberg when the phones were dead for about 3 hours. When the
mm,
phones finally came up, she called Bloomberg and they didn't know.
mm,
And since I couldn't call her, cell phones and landlines were dead. Finally, the internet came back up and a friend of mine emailed me. I
mm,
emailed her, someone who lives in my neighborhood, and told my wife that I'm okay. So I think for her and my kids, they were also quite aware. They were old enough to understand what was going on. I think to everybody, we all recognize that what we had here was a tragedy that went way beyond me or them, and they saw when I became a mountaineer, what
mm,
led me, that the circumstances led me to change so radically. And they were very supportive of it. They understood it. We all knew we lost so many friends and family
mm,
that day. So it was a sad moment, but they ultimately were relieved I was alive and
mm.
understood why I was thinking differently about what I wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah. And you said it sparked a career change, didn't it?
It
Um,
did.
walk me through that moment of how did you change your perspective on how you were looking at your previous career, and how did this new thing that
Yeah,
you're doing, how's the feeling of alignment like with this one?
indeed. Well, when you think about any career and anybody, you look out, you protect yourself. You want that career to go well. You want it to
Mm,
be lucrative. You want the power, the pride, the prestige, whatever it is that you feel you want out of a career. But
mm,
one thing I'm certain about where I was in my career, I was concerned about myself. And it's not that I would hurt anyone or I wasn't concerned with other people. It was
mm,
all I could do to preserve and to grow my own career. So every day
mm,
I woke up in the service of my success. What do I need to do today to continue my success? Where the mind shift came was on the mountains that I climbed. I was led by these wonderful guides, and
mm,
they were inspirational. They were very good teachers. They were very patient. They were technically adept at their craft, and it inspired me. And what I thought about is they are spending all of this time on mountains in the freezing cold with
mm,
terrible food, unpredictable weather. And here they are leading guys like me up these
mm,
mountains. And I thought about that. Those mountain guys embody every quality of the best teachers I ever had. So the
mm,
mind shift came when all of a sudden I began to realize and to redefine what success meant. So success was no longer about the money in my bank account, which is important. I don't minimize that. But
mm,
all of a sudden, I began to see that my success is based upon the communities I build and the lives I touch.
mm,
So, because was very fortunate to have had a career that was lucrative, I
mm,
had the capital to be able to make a choice that I could start my own business. But the difference was I'm now going to wake up every day in the service of someone else's success. And
mm,
to your point on the alignment, what I'm doing here now, I'm aligning a renewed sense of purpose. I was very passionate about wanting to give the gift of great teaching that I had from a couple teachers that had an impact on me. I could
mm,
give that to other people. I worked hard on my craft very diligently to be good at what I did, but I also had
mm,
the capacity to teach other people to do the same. So, what I've come to find out now is short of raising my children, this has been the most fulfilling thing I've ever
mm,
done. And while I'm very grateful for the first career that I had, I didn't see fulfillment. I didn't think of it that way. I didn't care about it. It didn't matter what fulfillment. I just want to fill my bank account. But I didn't
mm.
fill the soul. I didn't fill the heart. That's where it changed.
Yeah, yeah. There's plenty of things that you said there um, that I want to get into. One of them is mountaineering. It sounds like you have a very special relationship with mountains. And the second
Indeed.
thing you said was And the second thing you said was you were mentored by a few people who really changed the course of your life. And
Yeah.
you could probably lump them all together in that they were all mentors, both the mountains and your people. So talk to me a bit about mentors in your life, be it symbolically through mountaineering or through uh, people indeed. And
Yeah.
what are the lessons that these mentors have taught you?
Yeah. Well, I want to give credit to each book that I published. I dedicated each to the best teachers I ever had. And the
Hmm,
first one was my father. My father was a professor, a college professor of linguistics. My father was a
hmm,
very scholarly man, but he was a phenomenal father and he was just a great teacher. My father had the capacity to bring whatever subject matter he was talking about to life. He was very
hmm,
enthusiastic. He was and it was an energy that was very contagious. I
hmm,
picked up on the way that he would teach me and my brothers. Wow, this guy's a great teacher. And while I'd never been in his classroom, I recognized he led by example. What can I learn from him? So even before I became a teacher, it was my father's methods of enthusiasm that were infectious. And I never forgot
hmm,
the impact he had on me. So while I
hmm,
didn't try to mirror his exact methods, because he
hmm,
was a very different kind of person than I was, I borrowed the very best of him.
hmm,
And then the second book that I dedicated to, when I think about my US college experience, when you go to college in the United States, you take 40 courses to graduate.
hmm,
And one course and one professor had more impact on me than all other 39 combined. And his name is
hmm,
Eric Skopek. And I dedicated The Moment That Defines Your Life to Eric.
hmm,
He taught me the art of debate. And I never debated in high school. I never thought I would debate, but I had a free elective in college that I could take anything I wanted. And this course debate. And I figured everyone going to law school will want to take this. But I said, what the heck? Let me give it a try. It's something I've never done before. And his teaching style was like my father's. He didn't
hmm,
remind me of my dad, but he used characteristics, very enthusiastic, very caring. He challenged me. He got the best in me. And
hmm,
now flipping that to the mountains, when I was learning to become a mountaineer, the mountain guides were very much like that. They were very enthusiastic and passionate about being on the mountains. They were very good teachers. There was a
hmm,
technical aspect to mountaineering you have to be able to master. So, to
hmm,
your question, when I combine the best of the teachers that I had, say in a classroom or at home, the best of the mountain guides I had, what are the characteristics that they all have in common? They inspire,
hmm,
they provoke me to be better. They raise my best to be better. They get the best out of me, and they do that in such a way that is both inspirational and instructional. So really
hmm,
the call to action for our listeners, think about when people are in your gravity, are you instructional as well as inspirational?
hmm,
Just being instructional is okay, but that's not memorable. Just being
hmm,
inspirational doesn't mean you're a good teacher. But if you
hmm,
think about the juxtaposition of one who instructs and inspires, that
hmm.
to me is the ideal teacher. And that's what I aspired to be when I became one.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. You mention inspire, not just instruct.
Indeed.
I am doing a PhD. I don't know if you know about it, but so
Oh, I
I'm
did
in
not know that. Oh, cool. In what subject?
psychology. I am
Oh, beautiful.
right, and I think the reason why I bring it up is because I've spent my entire life in academia so far, and instruct strikes a chord, but inspire not as much, or at least not always. So since you also teach in Colombia, I
Yeah.
was just curious about your thoughts on academia slash the education system broadly.
Yeah.
And do you think there might be a bit of a lack of inspire in it as much, not as much as instruct?
I'll work backwards. Yes, there is a lack of inspiration.
Yeah.
I am very fortunate. I represent Columbia University with an immense amount of pride. I love that
Hmm.
place. But when I think about the kind of teacher that I wanted to become, it was the complete opposite of the majority of my professors in college. I had a
mm,
good college experience in that it was a great time in my life. For the
mm,
age that I was a finance major. But think about the model of what
mm,
college was. You cram,
mm,
you exam, you regurgitate, you put it on a test, and you get a grade. The majority of the professors did not know me, didn't know my name, didn't care. It's as if they
mm,
were the sage on the stage. They got up, they talked for 55 minutes or an hour and a half, however long class was. You get an exam. And if everybody gets an A, we're all patting ourselves on the back.
yeah.
When I got to Wall Street, and as a finance major, it's a rigorous program. Probably, I'm not saying more than anyone else, but it was very mathematical. You had to
Mm,
work very hard at getting A's because it
mm,
required a great deal of memorization of formulas and other ridiculous things. When I
mm,
got to Wall Street, I realized every single day, nobody was talking about anything that I learned in college. What I learned were theoretical concepts and constructs from academics who had never been to Wall Street. The majority had no
mm,
practical experience. I was not in that classroom with any aspiration to become a college professor. This was never in my plan.
mm,
But many of them were dull. They weren't bad teachers. They knew what they were doing, but they were very boring. And it's
mm,
almost as if they didn't care. As far as they were concerned, I have this knowledge and I'm going to impart it to you. Well, fast forward to the 2020s, I can Google a lesson plan as quickly in a heartbeat. So it was
sure.
so disappointing to me that nothing practical, very little practicality came out of my finance education, and it was
Mm,
very disappointing. So when I decided, hey, I think I can do this, I'd love to start teaching. I didn't know whether I was going to be any good at it, but I had good role
mm,
models. I also knew what bad teaching was. And I said, I will not do that. And I'm not the kind of professor that goes up there trying to prove how smart I am because I'm the dumbest guy in the room.
mm,
I that doesn't matter. Yet often it's the publications, the grades, that I appreciate and I respect it. Those are not important to me. What's
mm,
important to me is the kind of professor that has an impact on the student, that has nothing to do with your academic accomplishment. That's all good. I respect all of them. It just doesn't speak to me. A
mm,
great professor inspires their students to get the best out of themselves. That's my model. I get and respect other people's approaches. That's the only one that I know how because it serves my students. It doesn't serve me. What I
mm,
found in academia is if I were asked to write a publication into an academic journal only read by other academics, that has no value to me. It wouldn't even be useful in my business where I coach executives all over Wall Street. So there is a place for that academia and that
mm.
kind of learning model. It's just doesn't speak to me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I guess there can be a bit of a lot of. So I think when you are outside in the corporate world or just public speaking, you can't not be engaging, right? People will not pay
Oh,
for you, people will not show up.
yeah,
But academia sometimes it just passes and can be considered as a norm. Although again, I'm also very blessed to have very inspiring and engaging professors. I do want to flag public speaking and communication for later. I do want to come back to that and get some more
of course.
concrete tips on that. But I do want to just circle back on the moment that defines your life. And I understand that the book is about stoicism and emotional intelligence. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes. It combines both. In fact,
Hmm,
my subject matter, what I teach at Columbia and what I teach at the executive level is the social science of emotional intelligence.
hmm,
And the emotional intelligence as subject matter, when we go to measure this quotient, emotional quotient, the quotient is a four
hmm,
factor model:
hmm,
self awareness, measure social awareness, self
hmm,
management, and relationship management. So if we think about this is something when I look at people's behavior, I can actually break down that quotient into four distinct parts. And I can
hmm,
tell you or me or anybody how emotionally intelligent you are. Now, that's a
hmm,
good thing because it helps us understand how do we become more empathetic? How do we become a more emotionally intelligent leader?
hmm,
There are a million books on emotional intelligence. And Yet that subject of philosophy that I never thought I would ever try, but philosophy to me when I was in college was was frivolous. I didn't understand it. I saw all these philosophy majors talking about Aristotle and Socrates, and I just didn't get it. I didn't,
Mm,
maybe I wasn't open to it at the time. So all of those Greek classics that I ignored in retrospect, I should have paid more attention to them. They just
mm,
didn't seem to fit any aspiration I had. How the hell am I going to use Aristotle and Socrates?
mm,
Until I read a book that a student of mine many years ago said, "Oh, you must have read this book." And I didn't know what he was referring to. It's called Meditations by the
mm,
Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And I
mm,
said, "Well, I know of the book, but I've never read it." And he said, "This is something." He said, "I'm surprised knowing you. You strike me as the kind of guy who would really appreciate Marcus Aurelius's lessons."
mm,
And I didn't quite understand what Stoicism was. In fact, I think I misunderstood it.
mm,
So I read it and I couldn't put it down. And then I read it again and I said, "Oh my God, what Marcus Aurelius is suggesting here is a behavioral model for what happens under the weight of pressure, expectations, unpredictability." And I said, "My goodness, this was written several thousand years ago. This guy, he'd be my best friend. If
mhm,
he were alive today, everything he's talking about him being in charge of the Roman Empire was just landing with me. Like, oh
mm,
my God, this guy is so cool." So I became that. As I read Meditations, my mindset shifted. How I acted, how I reacted, everything was based upon these virtues. And he talked about courage and justice and wisdom and temperance, and especially the temperance part. Wow, we can temper our mood, we can
mm,
control our temperament. And to me, I wish college taught that. No
mm,
one ever taught us that stuff. All they were doing was filling our head. But if you're going to fill the mind, our minds can only take so much. What Stoicism appealed to me was how to clear the mind in a world where we're so cluttered and so busy, and our minds are so stuck with all these things we have to do. I
mm,
said, wow, when I write this book about the moment, I'm going to write the book that has not been written, and that's the juxtaposition of something old, the philosophy of Stoicism, and something fairly new, the
mm,
social science of emotional intelligence. So if I could combine these and I could help people to recognize we're going to borrow the best of both for the mindset, for the modern techniques of measuring emotional intelligence. And what I found is when I was testing the idea with people in my world, all of a sudden they started to share their moments with me. And I said,
mm,
"Oh my God, I think I'm onto something." So the book is several narratives of individuals who also have had their moments, a life defining moment, and
mm.
how they used emotional intelligence and stoicism to sort through the adversity and the challenges that they experienced.
Sure, sure. Yeah, Stoicism is something I tend to be a big fan of, and I've spoken about it every now and then in the podcast. I do understand the Stoicism part of it. I do understand the emotional intelligence part of it, but help me see through the intersection. That's the something you've created, which is new.
Yeah.
That's your contribution through
Yeah.
this book. So help me understand that middle intersecting two Venn diagram thingy.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I appreciate that because that's a good visual. The Venn diagram that combines a few things. When I
Hmm,
think about stoicism, stoicism happens in events. It happens in moments.
hmm,
And if all of a sudden something happens to you,
hmm,
your temperament is now on display. And how do you react to that event?
hmm,
Well, before I learned about this thing called stoicism, I used to be very reactionary. I thought, "Oh my
hmm,
God, I can't believe it." Then I all this negative self-talk and I'd start complaining about it. And it was totally unproductive and it was negative. So
hmm,
what stoicism brought was in any particular event throughout the course of the day. Now you could be in traffic, you could be at a line in Starbucks and lose your patience. I don't do
hmm,
that anymore. Now I'm very
hmm,
calm and I'm collected. And I remind myself and I ask myself, what would
hmm,
Marcus Aurelius do? he would calm
mm,
down and recognize that I'm not in control of that event. I'm not in control of traffic in New York or Mumbai or London or wherever it is. There's nothing I can do. I am in that lane.
mm,
When I am at a restaurant and the food doesn't come as quickly as it could, and I'm very hungry, instead of going to the waiter and complaining, I now go into a very different mindset. And I think about this. Okay, I have to remind myself. So these are intentional acts of clearing the mind,
mm,
recognizing the only thing that I can control is myself. That's it. I have no control
mm,
over anything in the world. Now,
mm,
emotional intelligence does not, development does not speak to that sense of control. So
mm,
what I found though is we act and react to events and people all the time. And when I look at people that I deem emotionally intelligent, or I assess someone who I deem as needing to improve their emotional intelligence, what's good about that is I can give them a score and a level of each of the domains of emotional intelligence and a
mm,
series of techniques that they can practice to become more empathetic, to feel people's pain, to understand that when someone is speaking to you, how do you speak to them? That's what EQ helps. But EQ does not address the control aspect of events. So, what I found is in all these interactions that we have all day, when you look at people, when they talk about their regret, many of them regret, I should have treated that person with more respect. I should have been more patient. I could have reacted differently. Stoicism inspires us that every time we are in the heart of an event that is less than ideal, it
mm,
is an intentional act of being calm, not
mm,
reacting, keeping my mouth shut, and recognizing what is happening here. I am not in control of the event, but I am in control of my mind. Now
mm,
we switch to the emotional intelligence.
mm,
Am I self aware enough to know that whatever my reaction could have been would have hurt that person or would have been unkind?
mm,
Never want to do that. So now I immediately think about, how am I going to react?
mm,
Am I empathetic to the situation? Am I aware of my own behavior? Because many people are not, they're clueless about their behavior. So let's
mm,
think about those intersections. I'm self aware. I recognize what impact I'm having in this event. I'm
mm,
keeping my mind clear and calm. I am not overreacting to something that pissed me off. Okay, got me upset. Take a deep breath. That's what the book does. It talks about in those moments, where do we find the
mm,
intersection of those two? And it does not happen naturally. It
mm,
requires all of us to be intentional, to be focused, to have a
mm,
mindset that speaks to us, that drowns out the negative thoughts and recognizes, I am here. Here is a situation. I will stay calm under the weight of the pressure that brought me to this event. I will be more emotionally intelligent. I will breathe. I will be very conscious of these lessons learned. And that's what
mm,
I got. That's what readers are telling me they're getting out of the book.
mm, mm. A lot of people who I imagine are listening to this, who are in this, who classify themselves as people pleasers. In other words, um, they care about other people's feelings, which from a stoic perspective would be outside your control. Um, and so I guess my question to you is, if you were to talk to someone who is trying to, impress everyone, there's that idea of I'm being too nice so that people don't dislike me. Um,
Mm.
how would this intersection of stoicism and emotional intelligence help them, and what would be some strategies or techniques that they should do in order to get outside that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I'm very fortunate that in my career in Wall Street, nobody cares about whether they're liked or not.
Sure.
They only care about the results. However, I appreciate
Hmm,
your point. And I
hmm,
think what I would advise that individual, if you're trying to act in such a way that you're trying to impress or you want people to like you,
hmm,
you are trying to control something that you cannot. In fact, What you're trying to do is a very external layer, and it's almost inauthentic in how it is you want people to like you. Now, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a bad thing to want to be liked. However, the only thing that you're in control of is your behavior. And if you try to alter that behavior in such a way that it doesn't come across as authentic, or people will say, God, that guy tries too hard. And I hear that often. He's trying too hard to be liked, or he's trying too hard to impress me. It
Mm-hmm.
usually backfires. It actually goes the opposite way. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when I meet people, what's interesting to me, when I introduce myself, my name is Chuck, I do this, whatever that is. Some people I meet, and I will say in academia, but it's not strictly them, they don't tell me who they are. They start rattling off their resume.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I did this, I did this, I did that. Or oh, I got a PhD from here. And it's like, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going on and on. It's like, okay, I appreciate that, but who are you? What you're reading to me is what I could have read on LinkedIn. It's what I could have read on your resume. That's not who you are.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do. Those are the things that you wear on your resume. But when I think about the people that are genuine, and there's a book by a New York Times author named David Brooks, and he wrote
Mm-hmm.
a book called The Road to Character. And in the book, what he talks about is most people have two sets of virtues. What he
Mm-hmm.
says are resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. And I think about my father. I lost my father to cancer. When and as a professor, when his students talked about my father, they talked about the eulogy virtues. They didn't talk about what he did. They talked about who he was, his contributions to them. They didn't rattle off his PhD from NYU. They didn't rattle off his 9 books and 170 publications. Nobody talked like that. So my point is, be mindful that what people gravitate to are not acting for your resume, but it's acting as if they would give your eulogy. What do they
Mm-hmm.
say about you in death? And that's a very Stoic thing, because the Stoics don't fear death. They accept it. But the reason I'm combining these is, think about the contrast, a resume virtue, a eulogy virtue. The
Mm-hmm.
Stoics just say, don't try to impress, just be who you are. And if you happen to impress, that's great. But you impress by your actions, not by your resume. And my recommendation to them, stop trying too hard. It's not impressing anyone when you're rattling off your resume. It, one, it's not unique. Everyone has a resume. I would rather you tell me that you contribute to a charity, you walk dogs, you help babies. I don't know, anything that
Mm-hmm.
at least shows me who you are, not what you do, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure. So if someone were to come up to you and they would say something like, "Hey, look, Chuck, I'm so passionate about cricket, which is a sport quite popular in UK and India. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
know much about it, but so I'm guessing I'm hearing what you're saying is something like that is much more inspiring and lights you up much more than just saying I went to X, Y, and Z college."
Yeah. Yeah. Think about what we as human beings, what do we do? Well, we think and we feel. And there is a model here where my own opinion is the people I gravitate are the people who feel think, that we feel first and we think second. I think when you look at and think about the difference between the resume and the eulogy virtues, the resume virtues are thinking, the eulogy virtues are feeling. When
Hmm.
I meet someone, I'm not friends with someone because they impress me with their resume. I am friends with people because they're generous, they're kind hearted, they're very good people, they're good fathers, they're good mothers. I do not befriend someone because they're a genius or they got a PhD from Harvard. That's all well
Hmm.
and good, but that's not the reason that I would be impressed by them. I would be
Hmm.
impressed more by their humility, by the things that they don't need to tell me. Just act as who you are, and I'll tell you who you are. But if you're
Hmm.
going to sit there and tell me all of your accomplishments because you feel better about it, that's not something I would recommend for someone. That's not
Sure.
impressive.
Sure. Um, One thing so this is picking up on assertiveness, and I know in your previous book you talked about speaking in an assertive way, being confident and certain about speaking,
Mhm.
and you even spoke of how you should have like charisma when you're on stage or otherwise. Um, I guess what I want to know here is there's a bit of a cultural thing here where, especially here in the UK right now, one phrase that is extremely common is sorry, which is we start sentences by saying sorry. Mm,
Yes, indeed.
yeah, yeah, and you can tell the American in the room by who does not say that, and you can tell the British person in the room by
No,
who
no
does say
doubt.
that. So
Yeah.
do you just see this as cultural variation, or do you think there's more to it? Like, is the person who's trained here as a bit of a disadvantage when they are speaking in that way, perhaps using more filler words? I can notice myself using perhaps a lot when I'm doing this podcast or otherwise. So yeah, take it where you will.
Uh, uh, yeah, no, I love your insight and I appreciate it. I've been going to the UK my entire career and I love hanging out in London and the pubs and it's wonderful.
Mm,
But to your point, I think there is in many cultures, different cultures are more conforming than others. And I
mm,
say that because what I find in my time in India, China, Asia, Europe, US, you look at the different places, Americans, I would say, are one of the least conforming cultures I've ever been.
mm,
And not to say that we don't have our cultural similarities, but Americans, part of being an American is an assertiveness of freedom to do the things the way you want to do them.
mm,
I myself, even though I'm first generation American, my parents are Brazilian.
mm,
Brazil to me was a very conforming culture, and I never wanted to. I had opportunities to move there, but I never wanted to. I never wanted to be part of that conforming culture. But when I think about the UK, I think about one man that was a nonconformist, and he is my hero. And his
mm,
name is Winston Churchill. And
mm,
everybody in the UK knows who he is.
mm,
When you listen to Winston Churchill, take the time not only, even though he was a great writer and won the Nobel Prize in Literature, not in peace, surprisingly, but when you read Winston Churchill, this was a man who had a way with words. And then when you listen to Winston Churchill, why aren't other English, British, whoever the Irish, Northern Ireland, whatever, why aren't they emulating Winston Churchill? I don't understand it because in conforming cultures, you just seek to be safe and you're going to be like everyone
mm,
else. I want to hear the next, and your prime ministers come and go, and some of them are good speakers, some of them are not. It baffles me that they
mm,
don't borrow more techniques from the great Winston Churchill, the great Martin Luther King. These were gentlemen that moved people. They represented causes. And
mm,
yet, when people go to speak and why I talk about charisma, all I'm asking people to do is be enthusiastic about your domain. When I
mm.
get an expert up on stage and she is flat,
Yeah.
we don't feel anything. When we hear Winston Churchill, oh my God, I've listened to everything he's ever said. He said it in ways that nobody else does. And here it is 50 years later, and we're talking about him. I'll be talking about him for the next 50 years if I live that long. And I think everyone looks to a role model. And there are role models like Mandela and Churchill and Gandhi. Gandhi, my goodness, the nonconformist in Gandhi. When I think about India and your independence,
Mm,
I just think you look at these gentlemen, they were the great leaders of the world. And what made them so extra special? They did not conform. They made a conscious choice to be who they were without the peer pressure, without the social judgment. Oh my God, look how different you are. I think everyone, I don't care if you're in the UK or in India, has the opportunity to bust out of that conformity and not play it safe and look around. I'll do what everyone else is doing. I hope in a climb to the top that I inspire people to find your own voice. Do not be held captive by the dogma of other people that are telling you what to do and why to do it. Go your own way. That's leadership to me. Otherwise, it's just followership.
sure. Let me chip in on that a little bit on social pressure. So you talk about social pressure and how one should try and avoid it, and if they face it, then they should like whiz through it. Can you zoom in a bit on that? So I think for me and for the situations around me, there has been a narrowing of what's acceptable speech and what's acceptable to put yourself out there. So be it online, like in a way that I'm doing right now, or
Uh-huh.
be it even in like a day-to-day conversation setting, there's a more of a narrowing of what counts as acceptable speech, let's say. And I'm using speech to only mean as a metaphor for your personality. So
Totally
how do you
understood.
deal with that social pressure, and how do you be true to yourself despite facing all of that social pressure?
Well, let me open with, I understand nobody wants to feel ostracized. Nobody wants to feel that they are a black sheep in a white sheep community. I understand.
Hmm.
But I also think what you're painting, I think what you're describing to me is a lack of moral courage. It's I'll
Hmm.
just do what everyone else is doing because nobody's gonna it's not gonna ruffle any feathers. It's not gonna raise any eyebrows. Because what I find, and I see it in my students, I have many students that come from cultures that they come to school under the weight of the enormous pressure and expectation. Many of them are told, you will be a doctor or you will be a lawyer. That's all you can be. Don't even consider being someone else. So
Hmm.
they are trapped in that dogma of someone else's expectations. And what happens when you do not have agency in your life? You've already been trapped in that lane under someone else's vision of what to do with your life. So what do people do? They act in a way that is consistent with those expectations.
Hmm.
What I try to be, and I understand that, I don't judge it. I see it all the time and I respect it. I don't agree with it because
Hmm.
I think what I try to do is get people to have the courage. And this is hard. It's not easy stuff. What if you could make up your own mind about the way you want to speak and the way you want to show up, not just for speaking? I think that's a choice that everybody makes and has to decide whether you want to be different or you want to be like everyone else. To me, good leadership and living a fulfilling life is having the courage to be you and not doing what everyone else says. Oh my God, you shouldn't. Why are you so enthusiastic? Why are you doing this? And then they start comparing you to other people. It's very sad when I see people buckle under that pressure. I understand it and respect it. I don't agree with it. I think everybody has the opportunity to get out of that. They need good guidance. They need courage. In
Hmm.
fact, I would say nobody needs to be told what to do for the scenario that you're painting, but they do need to be inspired to do it.
Hmm.
And part of when I wrote A Climb to the Top, I can teach a chimpanzee certain techniques from my book, but I
Hmm.
can't teach a chimpanzee to be courageous. I
Hmm.
can't inspire them to be different. And when I see my students doing presentations originally in the beginning of my classes, they all look alike. All they're
Hmm.
doing is playing it safe, and success to them is the absence of mistakes. That is not success. Somebody
Hmm.
gets in front of me and gives me a technically perfect presentation. No filler words. Everything is just lined up. Okay, good. That's technical competence. You're halfway there. Where's the
Hmm.
rest? If you didn't move your audience, if you didn't give them a call to action, if you didn't inspire them to think differently, to act differently, to be different, to feel differently, you haven't done your
Hmm.
job. And I think a lot of the presentations that I see are just they're informative. They're not bad. They're just
Yeah.
informative. I could have read most of them. You could have sent me a PDF. I didn't have to listen to it.
Hmm.
The really good ones, they make you laugh. They make you think. Maybe they make you cry. So think about the difference here. Laugh, think, and cry. Where in your PhD curriculum does it say laugh, think, and cry? Well, it doesn't.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to. It's just a different construct for expectations when you defend your dissertation. You're
Hmm.
defending the factual nature of the studies of the research. That's not
Hmm.
what I do for a living. I have to help people to
Hmm.
see themselves in a better light. If I can help them to think differently, to feel differently, and perhaps to do something different. That's the very best of what I hope to get out of what I do and what I hope people get from me.
Hmm. A lot of people who struggle with this often tell me about security. They bring up things like, "Oh, my job is on the line. What if my boss doesn't like me, and then I'll be unemployed?" So do you think this is purely emotional in that, this is internal courage and, your boss will be fine? Or do you think people should make changes to move towards more independence slash entrepreneurial directions? Not all of them, the people who called for it. So do you think this is like purely emotional, internal engineering, or do you think there's things in the external world that they need to do slash change when they're worrying about security per se as the
Yeah.
cause of not having courage?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, let me state, I understand having not come from means when I was in a job and I needed to pay rent. I had no backstop. I didn't have any
Hmm.
money. What happens if I get fired? I know how that feels. I lived that life for many years until I didn't. But I've been there and I know what
Hmm.
that's like. So I get that. But what you're describing is you're just doing the same thing. And it's never going to change. You're just always going to be in that. I think by having the courage to be different, it doesn't necessarily tie to having entrepreneurial ambitions. I think you can be different, but what you cannot do is to be a jerk and treat people with disrespect. So,
Hmm.
I want to relate to the way I ask people to think about their careers based on a construct from a friend of mine from India. His name is
Hmm.
Suri Surinder. He grew up in Delhi, and he went to one of the IITs in Delhi.
Hmm.
And he wrote a book called The CTR Factor. And that was the observation that when he came to the United States, nobody cared that he went to IIT.
Hmm.
He had any interest that he was the top of his class. He scored higher on those exams than anybody else. And he comes to the United States and they're completely ignored. And he said,
Hmm.
okay, well, what do the Americans care about? What is currency? How do I get ahead in this company? And what he said, getting ahead in my company in America came down to three things: my credibility, my trust, and my respect. Not my intelligence, not my brilliance, not my academic
Hmm.
pedigree. Do, do I communicate clearly? Do I treat people with respect? And do I deliver on my promises? Think about
Hmm.
those three questions and think about the third one. Do I deliver on my promises? What if you're brilliant with a PhD from the finest university? You went to Oxford or Cambridge and you don't deliver on your promises. You are of
Hmm.
no value to me. You're of no value to anyone in my world.
Hmm.
I don't care about your brilliance or academic accomplishments. I do care that you deliver on your commitments. And what Suri talked about, and this is what I hope people think about, be the person who is credible, that can be counted on, that always delivers up to or above expectation. Not the way you speak, but your currency. And that's what he talks about. Your value to other people is based on the delivery of those commitments. So sadly, I've been around very intelligent, well-educated people who do not. They talk a good game. They say all the things they're going to do, and then they don't do it. And somehow they think they get a pass. Well, they don't. You said you were going to do this, and do it. And if you can't do it, tell me why and I'll help you. But I think that that's where people get trapped into: how can I improve my currency in the company? And that's by building your credibility, your trust, and your respect. So every act, think about, does this help my credibility? Yes or no? And if it doesn't, don't do it. How do I build that trust, which is the most important part of a marriage, of a company, of an employee? Do I trust them to do what they say they're going to do? And I think that that is what I hope people think about. Don't even think about how am I going to be different? Am I conforming? Focus on delivering on your commitments. Because if you
Hmm.
do that, when the promotions come, when the projects come, when they consider who do I want to carry the ball for me, I want the guy who has a proven track record of credibility, trust, and respect, because that's the only assurance that I'm going to have that it's actually going to get accomplished. And that does not tie to intelligence, to academic pedigrees. It's just you get it done above expectations or you don't. So what I advise people: deliver 10 to 15% more than what is asked of you. Always over deliver, under promise, over deliver. Do not over promise and under deliver. That's a credibility killer.
Hmm. I see. Yeah. Thanks for that advice. It's not only clear, but also very actionable. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will
Indeed.
feel inspired from that. So I want to switch to, for the last 5 minutes, I want to switch to public speaking and communication. So this is something that you tend to be an expert at, and you have prolifically written about it, and you have delivered on it. When I was doing my research on this podcast, I saw many of your videos, and they were like extremely delightful to watch, and everything from the confidence,
Oh,
but
thank
also
you.
like I could notice that this is trained. This is not something that perhaps you just showed up. I don't know. Maybe you showed up like that. But speak to me about if someone aspires to be a good communicator, a good public speaker. Um, what does a training plan look like for them?
Yeah, it's I'm glad you mentioned that because I do get that a lot. It's like, "How are you the way you are?" And they think that I was just born this way. And it's
Hmm,
like, "Are you kidding? I am one gigantic act of intention. I
hmm,
became the person you're looking at because this is the person I needed to become.
hmm,
Nobody was gonna do it for me." So, when I was in the role of a public spokesman, and I think I was put in that role because people saw my enthusiasm.
hmm,
I used to run an operating division of a company, and all of the people in charge would give updates. Most people got up there to give their updates, and they were boring. They were very factual, but they were
hmm,
dull. I said, I'm not going to do that. That's just boring. I'm going to get up there. I wasn't purposeful about it. I was just enthusiastic because how would I want to sound? How would I want to hear myself?
hmm,
So when I got into that role, it was an enormous responsibility. And this was pre TED Talks. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't trained. I trained myself. But I
hmm,
thought about, well, what is it that I do? And I wasn't exactly sure what I did. So one of my best friends sat in an audience at one of my speeches. And at the end of the speech, he came to me and he said, "Hey, here's what you do." And he handed me a list and it had 10 things.
hmm,
And he said, one of the things you do, you pause in between certain things. You allow the listener time to catch up, and I can see you're catching up. You don't run one word into the other, and you never use filler words.
hmm,
Well, that's why I pause because I'm intentional with what I'm going to say, and I want to avoid I mean. So when I pause, I'm very conscious not to say a filler word. And
hmm,
and so what he had became the basis of the 10 commandments of great communicators, which is the framework for a climb to the top.
hmm,
So my advice to people, do not dismiss this as something that you just do.
hmm,
Treat this with the same rigor and intention that you do
hmm,
for you psychology, for my engineering students.
hmm,
This is a craft that is not limited to any particular profession, and anybody can achieve
hmm,
mastery. But if you're going to be the master engineer or the master cricket player or the master whatever, it takes practice, it takes mistakes, it takes time, and it takes patience. But first, it starts with a good guide and a good coach.
hmm,
I wrote a climb to the top for people to become that climb to the top. And I have many students who have become that.
hmm,
They are not professional communicators like me. They have other professions, but they committed to the same rigor and level of
hmm,
wanting to become that, to communicate in ways that others would want to listen to them. So you don't have to read my book. There's a million books on there, but take it seriously. Practice, look in the mirror and speak to yourself. Take out your iPhone and record yourself.
hmm,
Ask your friends for feedback. Hey, I'd like to give you a 3-minute mini TED talk. Can you give me feedback, please?
hmm,
I am baffled why more people don't do that because they just want it easy. Oh, I'll do a little bit of what Chuck tells me, a little bit of that. No. And to your point, when you see my videos, that is me. I'm,
yeah,
but only because I became that. I wasn't always like that, but I practice my own, I take my own medicine. And my advice to other people, people really admire and great communicators. They appreciate it. And when you think about when you speak, it comes down to three things. Is it clear? Is it concise? And is it purposeful?
hmm,
People detest others that talk just to hear the sound of their own voice. They are not clear. They are not concise. They are not purposeful. And that's what I try to be. Sometimes a little more long winded than I'd like, but only because I'm trying to add value to a conversation. But think about that. How do you get to clear, concise, and purposeful? It comes with a toolkit. Engineers have toolkits. Psychologists have toolkits. Every craft that I've ever known has a toolkit. Why not communication? A climb to the top is that toolkit. Practice it, be it, live it, learn it, speak it, listen to it, but commit to it with dogged determination. That's how it gets done.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I guess the only thing I will leave the listeners with these action steps, and I'm being mindful of time. So the last question I would ask you is there anything I should have asked you that I did not?
Oh, I appreciate that. This always is such a valuable thing because it allows me a little bit of input here without the prompt. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I would say to our listeners, it's not that something you didn't ask me. I would encourage you to heed a certain quotation from a very smart man that I never met. In the
Mm,
13th century, there was a Persian poet named Rumi. And what he said, and I play these words every day. He said,
mm,
or let me put a little further context. Yesterday, I was clever and I wanted to change the world. I'm going to pause for dramatic effect. Today, I am wise, so I am changing myself. That to me is the most powerful quotation that I live by every minute of every day. I
mm,
see lots of people wanting to change the world, and they're very frustrated when they don't. But what I
mm,
have noticed, they haven't done anything to change themselves. They have not improved their communication. They do not deliver on their promises. They do not align their actions and words, and they can't understand why people aren't listening to them. Think about the enormity of that statement. All of us, you are, all of us have a past, and you have the opportunity to change many things. But the first thing that everyone should consider, what is it about myself that I would need to change in order to affect others? And I
mm,
think where I find is the biggest, maybe balance. I'm not sure that's the right word of putting it, but where I think the commitment lacks is people do not change themselves. They think that just by being is good enough.
mm,
Decide what is about you. Don't try to do too much. So if it's communication, commit to that. If it's emotional intelligence, commit to that. Stop trying to be everything to everybody and stop trying to do everything. The
mm,
world demands specialization because there's a million people out there that do things well. Be great at one. You can be mediocre at 100,
yeah.
great at one. That's what I hope to leave, and focus on it as if there is nothing else in the world that matters. And everyone is capable of doing that if they drown out the distractions, put away the phones, stop listening to the rest of the world, and decide what you want out of your life and become that person.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Chuck, this is the time I get to thank you. We started with
No, and
talking
thank
about,
you.
yeah, we started with talking about your story. You mentioned about your father and the mentors you had in life. We talked about mountains. We talked about your new book coming out, The Moment That Defines Your Life. We talked about EQ and self awareness and the four things that it broke it down into. We talked about how events we can control and not control, and how that might lead to anxiety or not. And then you finally concluded with the message that you should not dismiss public speaking and communication as an area of life, and we need to pay as much attention to it as we do to any of our pursuits. And of course, you left with this beautiful words of Rumi, and couldn't have been a better end to this conversation. So, thank you very much for coming on the show and teaching us about all of these wonderful things.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sankalp, for the opportunity to be able to collaborate with you, to speak to your listeners. I'm grateful for that. I thank you, and I hope we will cross paths again.
Likewise.